actually the most valuable feedback you can give me is how you feel about something.
Mm.
So, I think this ability is too strong. I use it this way and I feel very strong in that instance.
Mhm.
Rather than, I think you should reduce its damage by 50. Hey, a lot of people are complaining about the servers.
Yeah.
What's going on? It's gonna sound weird, but essentially, I don't think you like payload as much as you think you like payload,
Mhm.
statistically.
Matchmaking as a whole with the player base, even at plat ranks, gold ranks, etc., people have seen issues in recent. Do you have any comments on that? Why that's happening, or solutions coming soon?
So this is one of those questions and one of those answers that will rarely satisfy people.
All right, quick announcement. We have released a website for Paladins. I know, really weird, interesting, awesome. I love it. Link below down in the description, realmstats.gg. You can come to this website to check out analytics for Paladins, and we have future plans on this to update the UI, make it more intricate, adding a ton new things. As you can see, we're going to be working on matchups so you can see counters for champions, etc. There's a ton of different stats here and super useful stats to check out. You can check out team compositions, you can check out win rates by maps, talents, ranks, etc. There's a bunch of different filters here. Like say I wanted to go to map, I want to see how Cassie is performing on certain maps. I could type in Cassie, boom. How is she doing? She's struggling on Bright Marsh. I find that interesting actually. So if you want to check this out, let me know down below. Check the description for the link. If you like it, go share it to your friends. The more support we get on this page, the more we plan on developing it. So if you like it, check it out, use it often, and be sure to pass it around. I love y'all, and I'll see you in the video. Okay, welcome. Thank you for doing this interview. I appreciate it a ton.
For sure. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Honestly, let's just get right into it. So, first question. What do you do at HirezNeco? Give people explanation. What do you do? What's your job title?
Yeah, let me give the rundown real quick. So my name's Kevin. I go by Nico. I am a game designer at Paladins, or on Paladins for Evil Mojo. That means that for a game team our size, we have fewer than 5 on the design team. I touch a lot of different things. I give feedback on a lot of different things. I have input on a lot of different things. I guess some of the main points would be there are different types of design. Main points might be champion design. I help design champions. I alternate between another designer right now. Narrative design. I help write descriptions. I help name content. I help do lore, all that stuff. And systems design. You might know me from such greatest hits as VGS 2.0. I'm sure everyone loves that one. And more recently, the cauterize changes, where I essentially said, hey, I think we need to do this for the health of the game. So that's generally what I do. There's no real day-to-day unless, there's cyclical things. I know patches are coming up. There's certain parts of different patches that certain things are going to happen, but there's no real, this is what I do every day.
One more question about yourself before we ask things about Paladins. How did you start your career in doing development, and how did you join HirezNeco?
Great question. I've always been I'm going to use the term systems guy, which is slightly different than like systems design. Everything is a system. Everything has at least some thought process put into it, especially things that have been designed by people for use by other people. So I've always been fascinated about that kind of thing. I went to school at Georgia Tech, which still has, I believe, one of the best systems engineering programs in the country, if not the best. But their systems program was a little bit too industrial, a little bit too much supply chain efficiency type deal. And I was interested in something a little bit more organic, a little bit more focused on my passions, one of which has always been video games, not only how they're made, but how they're interacted with, how people interact with the information on the screen, what makes things cool. Like, I love procs. I don't know if you like procs. I love procs. Yeah. Give me like an in-hand build that has a 5% chance of 10 different effects happening. I'm sold. So that kind of thing always made me want to get into gaming. So I helped found it was actually the Smite Club at GT. Put me in contact with this local game developer, hi-rez Studios. Who were they? Which helped me learn about their internship program. I actually interned for Smite as a quality assurance analyst, And then over the course of the next few years, I made it known that I was interested in shifting towards something a little bit more design centric. I do want to say though, QA has been extremely valuable for me, not only as a person but as a game designer, working my way towards that. And then when there was an opportunity to submit an application for Paladins, I took that opportunity, and then I've been doing that since July of 2019, I guess.
Awesome. That's amazing. I think my story is very similar. I started, well, with the Smite into Paladins. I started with Smite and ended up getting into Paladins via that, into competitive. I was in competitive Smite, back into Paladins. So I feel like the story is pretty similar and pretty exciting. I think the QA thing, what you pointed on, is a super important thing, especially as a developer, understanding the process of like finding issues, figuring out issues, and I kind of just identifying issues in general. So that's a really good background to have.
Yeah, if I can touch on that really quickly.
Sure,
I mean,
yeah.
not only identifying issues, but also a couple other things that you learn very, very quickly if you get into the games industry. The one that I had to learn extremely quickly for my own mental health was how to deal with people who are passionate about the opinions they share online about a particular product. So, when as happens, if there is some issue with the game or is there some bug, and you're like, oh, it's patch day, I'm so excited to share the new patch with everyone in the community, yeah. And then they're like, how, do they even have a QA team, these bunch of fools, how did they let this through? And you're like, oh, I'll go back to my corner. So very quickly I had to learn how to deal with something like that. And then also, how just as QA, you get to touch everything. You're at the end point right before it goes live. So, you can talk to the art department, you can talk to tech art, you can talk to programming, you can talk to animation, and you get kind of a sense of how things, are fit together, which is kind of cool.
That's awesome. Yeah, I feel like building that mental fortitude is very important. I feel like the burnout could be pretty high if you don't have that mental fortitude there to like hear feedback and criticism, because people, that's a good way to put it, get very passionate about their opinions on things.
Right.
All right, first question with Paladins. With 2021, we were looking at 6 champions that year. What are we looking forward to 2022?
So we got a solid plan essentially through the rest of this year and into the next year. I can't really give like super amount of details beyond what we shared with the hi-rez showcase, but we have some big plans, which I hope is evidenced by some of the changes we're trying to implement in this first patch and things that we want to, or at least we've indicated that we want to get out for subsequent patches. New map, experimenting with different game modes, being willing to take essentially a risk on changes like the cauterize change. We're still fully invested in that. So definitely still cranking out new champs and focusing on doing even more beyond that as well.
Okay, well, a question to build on that a little bit is, are there any plans in the works possibly for reworks of older champions, kind of like out of design? Let me just give an example here. Somebody like Moji. I know at some point in the works I heard there was plans to turn her into a support a couple years ago, but are there any of those types of reworks coming possibly? So
I will preface this and all the rest of the answers with, and something I actually maybe should have said in my intro is there is a possibility that any of the answers that I give you, you personally or chat is not, fully satisfying. And I'll try to explain to the best of my ability why certain things may not be viable or why certain things sometimes shift in priority. I understand that's not fun to hear, especially when it's like, what about this really cool thing that we want to do? Why can't we do that? But I will try to be honest about that, right?
Absolutely.
So things like reworks are often a question of, I would love, if we had infinite resources, that would be awesome. And infinite time, but infinite resources. If we had, 50 programmers, I can say, okay, you 5, well, not that I direct the programmers, but, you 5, please go do this. You 5, please go do this. I want to rework this, and this. For animation team in infinite time, things like reworks are often a question of, to put it simply, like, is it worth taking those resources from something else that is new or that we feel has a higher priority to do things that may require subsequent additional changes? So things like Torvald has been on my plate or on my mind for a while. And as priorities shift, as things shift, it becomes a question of can we do that in a way that's satisfying, right? He becomes a new experience to play. without taxing the initiatives that we want to do to improve the game, or without taxing new content that's going to help us keep the lights on. There are things also I'll touch on briefly that people don't understand or don't realize will have to change if we make some changes. So, for example, let's turn Moji into a support real quick. So if we have just an example, if we have a VFX change to indicate that instead of damaging enemies with the spray, we're now healing allies with the spray. Does that mean that we have to shift the visual from something that's red and angry, or whatever, to something that's green and healy? Like, you want to be sprayed by this. Do we have to change the animations for any given ability that we want to change? Does that take away from something that's new? So I guess to explicitly answer your question, there are things on, I would call it the backlog. There are things on the backlog for that are reworking things that people feel are particular pain points within the game. Yeah. But it's all a matter of priority and resource allocation at the end of the day.
And I think that transparency right there, like you touched on it, is the resources. How many resources you'll have are very important. And like, I appreciate you sharing, because I figured coming into this, you wouldn't be able to answer all the questions and people aren't going to hear what they want to hear. But hearing the truth about it, I think, is honestly more important than hearing what they want to hear. Like, hearing the actual reason why these things are or are not happening is super important. And honestly, like, I appreciate that complete transparency on that.
I'm going to do my best. I mean, there are going to be things that are essentially either I can't talk about that, or this is the way it is, and it sucks to hear that. Yeah. Sometimes we literally just can't do that. Sure. And that's the answer, and that sucks to hear. But I'll try to be as forthcoming as I can with that.
Absolutely, and I appreciate that. Unsure if you know about this, but this has been a big question in the community, and I want to find somebody to ask about it. Is there any plans for Paladins competitive? I don't know if this is possibly above you, or like if people would know, but like if you would know.
I don't have the button that's like behind my back that I pull out and say, okay, Paladins competitive is back. So it's never like a done deal, open and closed, never going to happen thing. But I would say that we probably don't have any new announcements about that to make right now.
Right. Awesome. There's been rumblings. There's been talks about this possibly happening, because we know with Paladins, it's getting older at this point. There are issues that we've heard about in the code of the game with different developers and different iterations of the game that have caused a lot of bugs and caused a lot of issues in the game. Has there been any thought put into making a second Paladins or Paladins 2, or does that come down to like just a resource issue, like can't be diverted to it?
So at the end of the day, I'll say that we are absolutely committed to continuing to make Paladins as good as we can. It's not as easy as hitting the Paladins 2 button. I wish it were, really. And for what it's worth, we have talked about, like, internally, even if it's just offhand conversations, what would it take, question mark, to make a Paladins 2? Or as some people have suggested, just port the game to Unreal 4. Which unfortunately, whereas Unreal 4 to Unreal 5 has built-in functionality to make that way more simpler, Unreal 3 to Unreal 4 does not have that.
Okay.
So, I mean, probably not going to happen in the short time, but we are, like I said, like we are committed to making Paladins the best game we can.
Absolutely. So one thing with interesting question from the community, custom games, they're looking for more customization in custom games. We see a lot of these limited time moments that we love. Like there was one released with the Grover Vines that work like poppy bombs. It was awesome. Feisty Jalapeno was actually talking about, he worked on that. That was so fun to play. Modes like Pick Any. There's one with Bomb King poppy bombs where they would blow people across the map. Those are so fun to play. It would be awesome to have those in custom games. Do you think that's a possibility?
I think it's absolutely a possibility. I think that's something that we have already planned for. It's a matter of timing and of production schedule. We want to, it's my personal philosophy, regardless of the game I'm working on at the time, it's my personal philosophy that making as many tools available to the players to create their own content increases the longevity and the quality of the game way beyond anything else that, well, not anything else, but, way beyond what you might imagine from something like that. The question is, we have a system in place. Can we build on that system? How incrementally, what do we do? Can we release just a few extra customs options? Can we release like all the LTMs as their individual customs? Like how far can we take it incrementally? Because there are some people who, do we just wait until we have quote unquote the finished product and release it all at once? Do we allow players access to things that may be a little bit janky in the short term, but we want to get it out there? But the short answer is we're very interested in making customs more customizable. It's just a matter of getting it done.
Sure, just a matter of time, when to do it. Timing is very important. I think that an important thing you noted on is, what do you do? Do you release it all together, or do you release it bit by bit and see how people like it? I think I would like bit by bit. I think maybe releasing one, just say, hey, here's a teaser. Do you guys like this? Like, put feelers out there would be nice. I know, especially as a content creator doing custom games, it would be absolutely a ball to play like pick any in custom game, have that option. So awesome.
We also sometimes take the opportunity to make other changes at the same time. So like if we're reworking any, let's say the store, reworking the store or something, would we want to make UI changes at that point? And so if some stuff like customs, we might also take it just weighs into when and how can we do it. Do we also take that opportunity to do other things, or as you said, do we just release just incremental things and allow players to play right away?
So very important question.
Okay.
The community has been a problem for a while. We've heard bits and pieces about this from different people, but can you speak on what is happening with certain server issues, and how in depth is that being looked at, and what are some of the fixes that are planned that you know of, or any information you can give us would be awesome on the servers and what's going on?
So we're very aware, right? There's no way we couldn't be aware that the servers are an extremely important topic. It's actually something that I've championed internally for a long time, for like a stretch of a couple months. Every time I had a one-on-one, I was, hey, a lot of people are complaining about the servers. What's going on? And so essentially the way it was described to me is that if there were a fix that could be, like, if there were a way, just cold way to increase or make better the servers by throwing money at it, then that would be a possibility. But there isn't, apparently. Okay. And the way it's explained to me is that there are other factors that are a little bit obfuscated for me personally, anyway. But we absolutely know that it's an extremely important thing. And as frustrating as it can be for some players to hear stuff like, can you please give us the match IDs for servers that you felt were not performing properly, that is useful to us. And essentially, as far as I know, we're continuously working and listening to the community about like whether or not anything that we do on any given patch will help. Okay. Beyond that, I can't really give you too much.
Sure, I appreciate that. That's honestly more than I've heard before. So it's more information to have in the bag, and for players to understand why this problem is occurring and why it's not being immediately fixed. So definitely appreciated. Quick side note, PTS update today.
Yes.
Amazing. Absolutely.
Oh,
took a look at it and love the changes. Love the there was actually a question from the community that I was going to ask that was kind of solved in that, was with Cauterize being removed, since it was a focal point of the item store, are other items going to receive increases or decreases to prices to balance around that? Because Cauterize was the focal point for most classes to buy. So I think that kind of answered that a little bit in the changes.
And that's a whole other interesting conversation, really, is the nature of Cauterize, the nature of pieces that are so integral to the balance of any given game over the course of its life cycle, that by changing it, you touch so many different things. If I can touch on that briefly, or like a short description. There are changes that we made, as you noted, with the PTS. Essentially, not having to buy Cauterize, as you noticed, right, opens up a little bit more of those credits for other things. That makes those more accessible. That makes essentially the impact, or especially early game, of those things a little bit more noted. And we're going to be looking at how Cauterize performs in this upcoming patch, and probably making a couple more changes. Like you noted, this Cauterize has been integral to the game for so long. It touches so many different things. There's a lot of complications with that. We want to make sure that we do things in a way that still feels palatable while still addressing some of the things. So, there may be an interval change, or there may be a cap value change. There are a couple different knobs we can tweak for Cauterize depending on how we see it play out this upcoming patch. But we are definitely keeping an eye on it.
All right. Awesome. Building on that, this is kind of with the showcase, and then leads into a question. Absolutely love the champion design in the showcase, that part. That was awesome to see the process of that. Could you walk us through the process of balance this time and talk about like how that process is internally, like going through balance changes on, let's just say, a certain champion? If you're going to go and balance a champion, you feel like, how do you identify that there is a balance change needed? And then what is the process of going about that?
So yeah, so that's a really interesting and kind of in-depth topic, right? Because there's I mean, I know it's kind of a cop-out answer, but there's a lot that goes into that.
Yeah.
And so we internally have a bunch of tools to help identify areas that may benefit from balance changes. And those include, but are not limited to, literal statistics. We can query, essentially we have a database we can enter queries into that says, if I wanted to say, okay, for this 7-day period at this rank, what is the win rate of non-mirror matched champions by whatever, right? And we can pull that statistic, and so that's one way that we can identify outliers. For instance, if we do across all skill levels, this champion has an 80% win rate. That's probably not healthy, especially if that's probably not healthy for the game. So that's definitely an outlier right there. So statistics, quote unquote statistics, and numbers are a valuable tool, but there's also more that goes into it. If there is something that's really interesting, is if there is something that is an outlier statistically, either strong or weak, but is not perceived that way, like by the entire community. Let's say there's a champion with a win rate across all skill levels and everything of 50%. So theoretically, perfectly balanced if you count win rate as balanced. Of course, it's more than just that. It's perception, it's experience, all that stuff. But let's just, for the sake of this argument, say 50% is perfectly balanced. But the community says, I hate this champion. It is too strong. Every time I play against this champion, I hate the experience I have. Then that is a candidate for quote unquote balance, or shifts, or quality of life changes, or addressing things that are pain points that are maybe not supported by the raw numbers. We also source balance suggestions from the community, right? We look at different forums. We look at the Discord. We look at people who yell at us on Twitter. We look at all pros, everyone who has an opinion. It's worth hearing. And part of my job is to kind of pull out from what they say what they mean. So if they say, I hate this champion, then it could be any number of things, right? Or this ability feels weird. It could be any number of things. And so we try to pick out and identify things that could be addressed with those balance changes. And so I guess the kind of the overall answer is, and then I'll give a short description of what how it actually works internally. The overall answer is there are a lot of different tools that we have to determine what candidates for balance changes or for changes in general. And then internally, we have multiple meetings over the course of a patch, usually well in advance. We start brainstorming. We say, okay, these are the sources. The AOC has come to us and said, hey, their communities really feel that this is something that should be addressed. So we'll add that to the list. We'll talk about it internally as a design team. We'll have usually one person make an initial draft of balance suggestions or balance directions for a given patch, run it by the rest of the design team again, run it by the rest of the team internally, like the entire team, get their thoughts on it, and then kind of go forward with, okay, so what are we trying to address? How do we think we can address that? Is this a numbers only change? Do we need something more significant? Do we need, what kind of support would this need? And then we implement those changes internally. We'll play test with them a while. We'll get more rounds of feedback. And then eventually, when we feel like we're kind of close to the right place or what we want, it'll release the PTS. And ideally, we have the time and resources to make additional balance changes based on PTS feedback before it goes live.
One thing with AOC, one thing community has noticed that they haven't been showing up on the patch notes recently.
Sure.
And that's one thing people are kind of like questioning, like why that's the case. People weren't sure if it was an oversight, if it was on purpose, or if that's something about. But if it is, any information you can give about that, that's been kind of a question in the community recently.
My impression is that it has been partially to shift focus towards amplifying the AOC and their platforms through other means rather than just slap it on the patch notes and that's the end of the deal.
Okay.
And part of it is to and this is semi-anecdotal. Part of it is to like not shield but to divert some of the frustration that could come with that. So for example, you're my AOC representative. I told you about this balance change. You said you suggested it to them. Why didn't they implement it?
Okay.
Or I see your name or I see AOC next to this balance change that I particularly hate. I think it's dumb. Like, what are you doing? So while we absolutely acknowledge the benefits of the AOC and they've been extremely helpful for us, we want to shift towards amplifying where they are beyond just the AOC next to things that they brought to us on the patch notes is my impression.
Good. That's good to hear because that's one thing. Another thing people have brought up is they want hi-rez or Evil Mojo to do more to promote the AOC. Because I know a lot of AOC members produce videos of the meetings, and one thing people were asking for is Evil Mojo to look into like promoting their videos more, like maybe in game or out of game more on the social medias, and kind of just pushing that content and saying, hey, this is what your AOC member is doing. Go talk to these people if you want feedback or if you want to give feedback or changes, etc. So
I think it'd be great.
Okay, matchmaking. And this is going to lead into another question. Recently, at least I know this is a higher rank issue, but usually higher ranks always have interesting matchmaking at times because there are less of higher ranks, so the matchmaking can get weird. But matchmaking as a whole with the player base, even at plat ranks, gold ranks, etc., people have seen issues in recent. Do you have any comments on that, why that's happening, or solutions coming soon?
So this is one of those questions and one of those answers that will rarely satisfy people. So at the highest level, the simplest and most effective way to improve matchmaking is to increase the size of the player base. Outliers, both at the bottom and at the top, experience the most extreme circumstances. And so that will include how did I get put into a game with insert rank here? Or why was my wait time ridiculously long? So there are so many things essentially that can be done. And we're never going to say, nope, matchmaking is done. We're done. Like that's the way it is forever. We're not interested in that, but there isn't, there's not a simple like, okay, matchmaking is better. Right. And there's also a question of, and again, this is one of those answers that people might not be satisfied with. There's also a question of how often and to what extent do we make changes before people realize what I just said. Yeah. So if we make changes to the timers, a lot of people were asking, please improve matchmaking, please improve matchmaking. We put out, I think it was a poll. We essentially put out feelers. How would you feel about increasing the duration? I think we did that through AOC actually, increasing the duration of the search time for your matches for increased fidelity in the actual matchmaking. And now that that's been out for a while, the consensus appears to be we don't notice. It's not a perceptible change, except for the fact that we have longer queue times. And so it's a question of, okay, to see significant matchmaking improvements, are you willing to wait? Like this is kind of an exaggeration. Are you willing to wait an hour for a match, 2 hours for a match? Do we change the timers every update? To trying to tweak to find this sweet spot that may not exist depending on the player base, depending on other factors. So I know it's extremely important. I understand it's extremely important, and we are doing what we can, but it is limited by some of those factors.
Understandably, and that's one thing I noticed. Like I was a big proponent of longer queue times, and I haven't really minded. I found things to do during queue, but one thing I noticed is once it was increased, or before it was increased, everybody was like, increase matchmaking, please. Increase the time to get better matchmaking. And as soon as it was done, they're all like, okay, matchmaking's too long now. Let's go ahead and decrease it again. That's one thing I noticed instantly. I talk to my stream all the time. It's pretty funny to watch like the community as a whole like jump from one side completely to the other. But one thing, at least in my eyes, perception I have is that's happening is because the player base has been decreasing a little bit lately. that could be a cause for worse matchmaking. With that being said, is there a possibility of crossplay coming to ranked to help alleviate that issue of less players in ranked equal worse matchmaking?
So that's another thing that we have also talked about internally. And if I remember correctly, the consensus was that we'd be willing to look into what would be required to do that, or at least put feelers out. So I can't give you a yes or no answer, but that has been something we've talked about.
Something being discussed. Awesome.
Yeah.
Because that's something that I've had thoughts about on stream. Like, I've been so back and forth on. I'm like, I don't really like the idea because controller versus keyboard mouse. There are issues with Paladins. It, like, compared to games like, let's just say Apex, for instance, this game is a bit slower. So a controller, at least using mine and like the aim assist, feels way stronger. So when you're playing against champions like Victor and Vivian, you're just getting beamed in the head on keyboard and mouse. It doesn't feel great. It's the same thing for a controller player playing against an Eevee. They can't keep up with an Eevee. It's impossible. So it has, at least in my eyes, its benefits and its downsides to it. I guess it's something that really needs to be weighed and figured out before it gets talked about and implemented.
And even beyond the concept, it's also the implementation.
Yeah.
Can we, we can go and talk to the ops team and say, essentially, like, is this literally possible?
Okay.
Which I think it is, right? But it's just a matter of what would go into doing that, even on top of should we do that?
People have had this idea, and I've seen it in other games, with esports not being a thing and there's not a competitive league. Is there a possibility to implement, or just kind of like, is it possible to implement in-game tournaments in something that automatically happens every week, and there's a crystal prize, you can get 5 of your friends together, it'll automatically put you into a 18 bracket, and weekly, bi-weekly tournaments?
So, interestingly, that was on the list of brainstorm ideas for what eventually became LTMs.
Okay.
So conceptually, so this is one of those things where, like, conceptually, awesome. Like, it'd be cool. It's a matter of, I would need to go talk to tech teams and say, hey, is this something we can do? What would need to go into it? Do we need new UI? Do we need new, we would need probably a new queue. Is that queue configurable with our current game system? To go talk to backend and say, like, hey, is this something we can do? Can we keep track of all these players? What happens if somebody leaves? What happens if somebody crashes? What happens if somebody, whatever, all that stuff. And so, yeah, so the high level conceptually, I think it's an awesome idea. Whether or not it's actually doable, I'm not sure. Is the answer I have. I know that's not super satisfying, but it's
not looking for super satisfying answers. That's sometimes like the truth. Answers. Yeah, honestly, I'm just looking for honesty and transparency. I think that's more important than making everybody happy, because that's just not something you can do. It's better like to make somebody feel like you were all listening and telling the truth, like a parent. Like, you got to be brutally honest with something. You can't hold it back.
I mean, I do want to make it explicitly clear that we are listening and that we do care. The biggest thing, like, I got used to people calling me whatever, pretty quickly. But the biggest thing that still gets me is when people say stuff like, they're just, they don't care. They don't care about the game. They're just lazy, whatever, who are just doing whatever. The people I work with are some of the most passionate people I know. And we very much care. We do listen. We very much care. And I do want to make that clear.
And I think this is a prime example of y'all caring, because, like, you're taking time out of your day to sit here on a Discord call to answer questions from me, to talk to the community. Like, I feel like I want to be like a middleman for some of the developers and Evo Mojo themselves and the community, because I think content creators should be that and should give y'all a platform to talk to them and the community a platform to talk to y'all. I think that's super important. And this, again, is a prime example that you guys do care and you're listening. The fact that you're here to start with.
Yeah, I mean, I love talking. I love talking. I love games. Like, I'm still a person. I still play games. I still, am human. I love doing stuff like this. I love talking about what we do. I love talking about Paladins. It's kind of tough. There are some times, unfortunately, where questions are asked with the intention of either derailing the person or attacking whatever. That makes it, a little bit more difficult to have conversations like this. But I love talking to people.
Question for the PTS. This is a personal question of mine. A frustration of mine, honestly. PTS ranked map rotation. Will it be coming? Will we be rotating maps in and out? And is that going to be more consistent in the future?
For this upcoming patch, I believe there is a ranked map rotation.
Okay.
I do not know what the maps are off the top of my head.
That's
I
fine.
think I think we're losing Timbermill at least.
Thank God.
Which is
Thank
you.
I might have dodged a few. I'm not gonna lie. I might have dodged a few Timbermill games lately. It's just.
But I believe that is a thing that's happening.
Good.
Consistency, yeah. So ranked rotation consistency, at least initially, was a little bit of like as we had fish, Adonis rotate out and fish come in, there was a little bit of miscommunication about okay, what are we doing? Like, but I think as things settle down, as we get into the plan that we have for this year, it will be a little bit more consistent. Yeah,
we're talking like 3 months, maybe 4 months.
I can't promise.
You can't promise anything.
Can't promise.
Sure. That makes sense. Another interesting built on that, another interesting idea for the game. See how this, if it could be implemented. Instead of pressing ranked, you join a map, you just see a map there. What is the possibility of a voting system? Once you get into a ranked game, there's a possibility of like 3 maps you can choose out of. Again,
conceptually, I love it. I think that's a fantastic idea.
Yeah.
So you don't get Timbermill or Shattered Desert 5 times in a row, and you're like, okay, I'm gonna go play Minesweeper or something.
Sure.
It's one of those questions where conceptually I love it. Can we do it? Or rather, what would it take to do something like that?
Has it been discussed before?
Oh, absolutely.
Absolutely.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if or when it would ever happen, but it's definitely been something that has been a pretty positive internal response.
All right. Awesome. You said there's 1 new map this year so far. Is there plans for more reworks of maps? Are we hoping to get a couple new maps? Because the last one was Bazaar, I believe, in 2018. So what, if you can speak on it, I know there's going to be 1. Are we looking to have maybe 2 this year?
I don't want to spoil stuff,
sure.
Right? I can speak a little bit too. So we've been doing some map reworks rather than new maps. And a lot of that is due to our resources, essentially. We have environment artists who are available, but we might not have the time and expertise of a level designer who would be needed for a new map. So now hopefully the implication of at least 1 new map coming this year indicates that we now have the time and resources of at least 1 level designer, and that might be opening up the ability for us to do more later on in the year.
Amazing. Awesome to hear, because I really love to see new maps. I think the reworks have been good. I definitely think there has been issues that have been addressed and like somewhat solved. Maps like Frozen Guard with like collision issues, hitbox issues, things like that are being addressed. But a batch of new maps is something that's always exciting for the community to hear.
Makes things fresh.
Yeah, it really does. It's just like new champions. Sure, you have the same roster of 50 plus other champions, but just having 1 new one always in the game just makes things interesting. One last question, and this is could be a tough one, an interesting one.
Okay.
So we saw with the sound issue with the Azan patch, we saw the sound bug, and it was in the game for a while. And right now we currently have an issue on, I believe it's mainly European servers, from what I've been hearing, where people are getting locked out of the game for about an hour and a half at a time. What is the cause for these issues? What is causing these issues to take so long to be?
Okay. I will firstly address the idea of why does it take so long for bugs to get fixed in this game? So part of that is there are a variety of ways to approach that kind of question, that kind of answer. I will say essentially that I don't want to encourage the idea that we don't fix bugs. We do fix bugs literally every update. This is something that we put a lot of time and resources into.
Absolutely.
Further, for specific bugs like that, that's the way I read it. Kind of like, why are there these specific bugs that are quote unquote game breaking or quote unquote super persistent that we haven't been able to fix in a timely manner, which I think is slightly different. Any specific issue might persist for a number of reasons, including we don't have a consistent reproduction. The easiest way for us to get a bug fixed is to determine why it's happening.
Okay.
And if there is something that makes it so that we cannot determine why it's happening, it makes it way harder to fix, firstly. Secondly, if things are important enough that where we would need to dedicate an entire team's worth of resources, we would be pulling those resources from other things simply to investigate. It's one thing if we have the reproduction, we know why it's happening. Okay, you're tasked with fixing it. It's another thing to have a lot of resources dedicated to finding out why it's happening. And it can be sometimes difficult to justify. Things like the loading issue, I am very aware is extremely frustrating, and it's something that is being looked into. But we are trying to track down why it happens.
Yeah.
And it doesn't, and we haven't figured it out.
Okay.
Is the short answer. And then kind of as an aside to that, let's say for instance that we put a patch out, we just missed something and it went live and we noticed something is wrong, but it would require a new build. It could be that there is the minimum time required for us to certify our new build with the fix. We'll have to fix it, which could take multiple days. And then a minimum amount of time required to get it certified by our third-party partners. So we need to send it to Xbox, Microsoft, Sony, and Nintendo, get it certified through their certification process, and then schedule the patch live. So we can't hotfix like next day. There's just straight up a minimum wait time.
Sure.
But that's kind of separate from, I think, things like the loading screen bug or the sound issue, where we need to track down why it's happening and get the fix out before we can even start talking about it, and that can be a little bit more difficult.
So just depending on the bug, there's like a multitude of answers.
It could be something as simple as, if you want to count a text description missing a number as a bug, that's super easy. I changed the text, and it's fixed in the next build. But as you mentioned, kind of depending on the bug, the complexity of the bug, what systems it touches, whether or not we can get a reproduction, if it's consistent, if it happens 1 in every 100 matches, that's very, very, very difficult, and it just multiplies the investment that would be required for us to find the source of the issue, kind of thing.
Sure. Just sounds like it's kind of just a resource game. It's kind of like how much resource you need to dedicate. Yeah.
If we had the funding and the resources that some big names did, I would be elated.
Absolutely, yeah.
Right? We could get more new stuff out, and we can dedicate as much time and resources as we need to figure out these things as soon as possible. But unfortunately, it's a matter of that not being the case all the time.
Absolutely, and I appreciate hearing that, and like we've reiterated that a few times, and I think it's important for people to keep in mind that at some points there just isn't enough people around. There isn't enough money around to get everything done right now, and that the people on the team care about getting it done. It's just a matter of, can it get done? Are there enough things to make it get done?
Yes.
So I think that's super important. They understands. Okay.
But especially issues like that, we are fully aware of their existence, and we like 95% of the time are actively working on tracking it down. So it's very, very, very rarely, if ever, that we just don't we're just like, okay, we're just letting it go. Nope, that's a bug now. That's not the case.
Every single bug is noted and being worked on. Like, this one's too small to we'll just sweep it under the rug.
Sure. Like the terminus, the terminus float, I'm pretty sure that's a feature at this point, right?
It's great. Love it.
Right? That kind of thing. Right?
Yeah. Some of those are understandable why they're in the game. Like, I remember, I don't think this was a bug, but like Vine Tech in the game right now. It was certified that this is going to stay in the game, I believe, right?
So it depends. I personally don't think it should stay in the game.
I don't disagree with you, even though it's fun. It's made Grover an absolute monster to kill.
It's also, I think there's a difference between tech and manipulating the way the ability has been coded to take it to gain an advantage that others don't have at base. Sure. That's my personal opinion.
Sure. And I've heard, like, that's interesting to hear, because what we've heard, at least what I've heard so far, is I forgot, somebody in my chat said it at some point, but somebody called it a tech from hi-rez, and they said, this is a tech. It's not going to really be fixed. It's not something we're totally looking into. It's just going to stay in the game. So that's one reason I've kind of like used it.
And that might be the case. And it's not something like, we're not going to ban you for using the Grover Vine tech.
Yeah.
Right. but it's just a matter of discussion, right, internally, and whether or not and how what we end up deciding is the appropriate way forward.
Awesome. All right. Well, questions all finished on my end.
Okay.
How would you be up to taking a few questions from chat?
Sure, if chat is gentle with me.
Chat, look at me. All right. Let's keep this genuine. Let's keep things wholehearted. Feel free to ask questions, but don't be genuine about it. Don't be nice, ask reasonable questions and think about who you're talking to. Nico's already told you who he is and what he does, so keep things reasonable within his realm. So would you want me to read off questions, or would you like to take it from chat yourself?
Sure, we can. Yeah, go ahead and pick ones that you think would be appropriate.
First one, will Killcams ever come back or replace?
So
play the game.
Yeah. So let me see. I don't know is the short answer.
Sure.
The long answer is that to some extent, Paladins was created on a framework that allowed for very quick iteration with the intent of getting to market quickly. And part of that means that if we seek to improve or change certain things, that we would essentially have to rip apart the code base to do so. So at things like Killcam and Play the Game, I think are conceptually, again, very cool. But it's a matter of, is it worth the extent to which we would need to make modifications to the game and its code base to bring it back in a way that's not so poor, as they were.
Understandable. That's an interesting one. Is there something new we're having this year that wasn't mentioned in the showcase? Are there more plans outside the showcase, like for big plans?
I would say yes. I mean, and that'll kind of segue me into talking about a little bit of how we address questions like that. Or, hey, you promised this was going to happen. You promised me a Torvald rework. Where's my Torvald rework, you liar?
Yeah.
I try personally to balance. I think we try to balance. Can we have plans, and we want to implement those plans as they're planned in the time frame that they're planned. But sometimes things change, whether it's priorities, we lose resources, we need to add, there's a marketing ask, whatever. And sometimes that means that we can't do things in the amount of time or to the extent that we wanted to. And then we need to balance, okay, yes, there's going to be this new awesome feature this year. And if, pyre forbid, something happens and we can't implement this feature, then suddenly it falls back on us. Well, on Vex's interview said you promised that this thing was going to happen. So what's up with that, you dirty liar? So essentially we just need to balance being excited and wanting to share things that are upcoming with promises are dangerous, kind of thing. But I'd say yes. That we have plans for this year and next year that I think are pretty cool.
This is like a batch of questions because I saw a couple ones that are important to talk about. And so there's two questions. Somebody wants me to ask about, I've seen, at least, especially with me being in the I have seen an increase lately of cheaters and seeing people who are speed hacking, aimbotting, etc. And I remember sending a few in. I forgot who it was, but somebody at hi-rez they've been dealt with. But that being said, right now there's not a good reporting system for cheaters. It's something that isn't in the game, isn't implemented. And that's going to lead me to another question about server reporting as well on the endgame screen. What about cheater reporting, server reporting, and the influx in cheaters lately? Is that something that can be addressed? I know that's a 3-part question, but
yeah, I got you. So the server thing, I wish there were a super convenient way. Right now, it's I think we have at least a Discord channel on the official Discord to provide feedback for that kind of thing. But essentially, just however you can get those in. Cheating in particular is something that I personally truly want to tackle. I hate it. I hate
absolutely.
it. So I can't provide a time frame or details on it, but there are active initiatives internally to increase both the effectiveness of the tools we have in place to deal with cheaters and such, and toxicity, as a matter of fact, and active efforts to add new systems to deal with that. So for instance, there is a perception that our in-game reporting doesn't feel as effective as players would like it to be. And that's something that this, one of the things that this internal push hopes to address as well. So I guess the short answer is I hear you and I acknowledge that because it's super important, and I agree that it's a problem, and that we are taking steps to improve those systems. And it takes time and resources.
Sure.
And I know that's not a fun answer, but it takes time to improve them. But it is something we're actively working on.
Awesome.
As far as reporting them, we do have an internal channel where I personally have given, like, I've clipped stuff on Twitch and sent it over with the details and made sure that people have been taken care of. So I don't want you to send me literally everything all the time, or I wouldn't, sleep. But there are channels internally. If you occasionally send, stuff that has clear evidence, there are channels on, a couple different channels. If you want to go to the lengths of creating a support ticket with evidence, that could be useful as well. And then we're also working on improving ways to help community members report those issues.
There's one question I saw above. Let's see, where is it? Okay, there it is. What about melee champions? Is that something that's going to be relooked at any point? We know Terminus was interesting on release and still has interesting issues. I don't know if that was caused because of the melee, but is that something that is possibly going to return, or are we going to stay to range champions?
So that's a very interesting topic. Regardless of, so a game like Paladins, melee means that generally you are effective within a certain range, melee range, right? And to be effective in melee range, you need to be more effective than range characters in melee range, generally. I'm talking in generalities here, which means that you are less effective at ranges beyond your melee range. So there would be kind of the conceptual balance of, would this melee character, a true melee character, be viable enough outside of melee range to get into melee range to deal with a champion without being frustrating to play against? So if they're within 5 feet of me, I die. And without being frustrating to play, like, I can never even get to them because I just die before I get to them and melee them to death. So that's kind of a game design conundrum. I think it's dangerous to do in a game like Paladins that has a lot of focus on fighting at range, at different ranges, a pure melee champion. I think that's why, at least personally, I tend to skew towards either pseudo melee or medium to close range, but not entirely melee type deal. I wouldn't say that there's no possibility, right? I wouldn't say that we're absolutely never doing it, because it's also a discussion that we have internally. I'm not the entire design team. I could be like, I don't really want to make a melee champ. I don't think it would be healthy for the game.
Yeah.
And other people would say, okay, well, it's not your champion, so we're going to do it anyway. And what could I do? I'd be like, okay, I would help the best I can. So I personally think it's dangerous to put a pure melee champion into a game like Paladins. But it's not a hard no.
That kind of brings me to a question I have. I think we already talked about this before. I'm going to ask it again so everybody knows. What champions have you worked on, or you've had a major part in creating?
Let me see if I remember all of them off the top of my head. Okay. All right, so I have made in their entirety Corvus, Vora, Vatu, Yagharoth, Azan, yep. And then I'm working on the next champion after 7. And I finished Ray for Adonis, who did about half, had spent about half the time through that process until he left the company. So I finished off Ray for him.
Okay. I love Ray. Not gonna lie, absolutely love Ray.
Ray's, yeah, I mean, Ray's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I wasn't a huge fan. I thought it was dangerous to put a damage cap ability in Paladins. So I'm glad it didn't entirely implode the game.
Yeah.
But So yeah, and and there's some interesting conversations to have there at a later date too about specific champions. Like for instance, I think Yagharoth, even though she averages out to a champion, is a champion of extremes, like the high highs and the low lows that make it frustrating to play against in some respects. So that was a really but it was cool to branch out a little bit and try to do something out of the box. And it's also cool to sorry, I'm derailing a little bit, but very briefly touch on the idea of it's not just literally the gameplay, it's also the player fantasy, it's also the player experience. So for Yagharoth, I very much wanted, initially I was going to have her ultimate essentially banish her and her target. Neither could be touched for the entire. I'm sorry, that was for Vora. For Yagharoth, I wanted to invoke this. This mini boss moment, essentially, where if Yagharoth is ulting somebody, the entire team needs to say, okay, we need to shoot that. We need to focus DPS. Yeah. Or 50 DKP minus. If you don't focus, the whelps handle them. For Vora, for instance, I wanted her ultimate to banish both her and her target. So neither, if it were the execute, so neither could be touched. It was going to happen, and that ended up not happening, and we have what we have now. But it's also the player experience that I'm trying to shape. Like I think Vatu is a really good example of really hitting a player fantasy. And so Vatu's not for everyone, right? He's not the easiest champion, but I think he hits that highly mobile, semi-ninja vibe fairly well, kind of thing. And if I forgot one of my children, I'm going to be very sad. But let me make sure I haven't. But yeah, sorry. No, sure. I think that's the extent of my question or answer.
Yeah, I think you touched on a little bit. I don't know if we'll have time for it today, but I think coming soon, we should have another conversation specifically on Yagharoth, because I know Yagharoth for me is one of those champions that like I do feel passionately needs like a complete like power shift. I think she needs like a lot taken away from her effective HP, so she isn't forced to have counters and put in maybe damage or mobility. But that's, again, we're running close to time here, so it's not something we'll fully discuss today, but it's something I'd like to discuss at some point, because I do think the idea, the fantasy, the lore is really cool behind Yag, but I don't think the balance, and at least for the casual balance, isn't there for her.
And so that falls, and so I don't disagree with you. That starts to fall into the same, okay, to what extent are we reworking an old champion? Yeah. What kind of resources would be required? So I don't disagree conceptually. Yeah. And it's definitely an interesting conversation to have.
Sure.
But
I think it'd be a fun one. Very important one. Thunderwitch loves your nails.
Thank you. I initially did this for Halloween, and I'm like, you know what? This kind of slaps. Yeah. And I have yet to figure out how not to immediately chip them. Like I don't take care of them. I just do my normal thing. I just have black nail polish on, but it's been good.
I think you rocked that. Looks great, honestly. I've noticed it a few times. Like, all right, I think I saw it first for Halloween. I kept seeing it come back and back. All right, I like that. Keep that going. Ooh, what's your favorite part of the character design process?
I love voice pack writing.
Ooh, okay.
Actually. So and I'll talk on something more traditional after that. But essentially, I love, and this is more than just like champion design. It's also I've written 30 plus voice packs at this point, something like that. And I love coming up with this concept of who this character is, writing the script essentially for all the voice lines, and then I get auditions per skin or per champion, and I hear a voice, and it's especially good when I hear a specific voice from like, nope, that person right there. That's the skin, and then I direct them in the voice session. Oh, wow. Could we get a little bit more, like I want this to be a little bit creepier. I want this to, it can get a little bit granular, but elongate the end of that word so it whatever. And then hearing that come to life and hearing that personality or that character come to life in the voice session is really, really cool. More traditionally, the brainstorming, the what if part of our champion design process includes, for instance, like I came up with 3 or 4 kit pitches for this next champion after 7. After a team-wide brainstorm where people just throw out ideas. What if they did this? What if they did this? and I say, okay, so this one is kind of thematically for Azan, for instance. This one was thematically, this is a hammer build. Is that what we want? This is a fire build. Everything about him is thematically fire. This is a whatever build. And then we kind of do that. What would be cool? What can we do? And then we mix the viable elements, so the elements the design team likes, together to get this kind of final pitch package and say like, okay, let's go forward with this. And then we'll keep iterating. But that's kind of fun.
It's the theory crafting. That's something I love to do in games anyway. Theory crafting is so fun. Finding new builds. I feel like that's the same thing for character design, or at least coming up with ideas with characters designs. Theory crafting is so fun to do. One of my favorite parts.
Yeah, and then just very briefly on the voice back thing, I hope one day to write a line that equals the Copacabana Cassie joke. I think that is the pinnacle of
gold standard
voice. It's amazing. I just love it.
I have people coming to chat all the time and like start the line, and then somebody else would continue it, and somebody else continue it after that. Oh my god, that is the gold standard for all of voice. Honestly, in any game, that's great.
It's absolutely just amazing. But I've had a couple that I've really enjoyed. Corvus Myrnos was great. Stop dying, you fools might be my most inspired line. It's just stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, I love talking about balance and everything goes into it.
Question from another content creator, Andrew Chicken. So with voice packs and skins, they contain voice lines that aren't actually used in the game. And we can tell that like via the wiki, that's all uploaded there. We can see that. Why aren't those used? And just kind of like, why are they there?
So part of that is part of the reason why we still record them is just in case, because if we suddenly had a use for those lines and only old champions had those lines and not new champions, then it's really, really, really not worth it to bring them back to like call back the specific voice actor and pay that money to record like 3 lines or 5 lines or whatever. So part of it's that. Part of it is that we are still interested in implementing specific things. The one in particular for me is spawn chatter between champions. There are specific lines for having specific champions in spawn that aren't implemented. I think that would be really cool.
Yeah, they'd be fun, like especially for like lore reasons, because Paladins lore, it's there, and some people have talked about it, and it's something that I think a lot of people are pretty interested in. And spawn chatters, take games like Valorant for right now, for instance. There's a lot of that. So there's a lot of character interactions, and you can start getting connection to the characters, start laughing with them and enjoying with them. So I think that'd be something that would be amazing to implement Paladins, is spawn chatter and just character chatter in general. So an idea for the future. Well, just like, I think the community would love that. What do we think?
I agree.
Yeah. Payload. Bunch of people asking about payload.
Yeah. Payload when?
Payload, please give it to us.
Give it to us. So, okay, hard truth. It's gonna sound weird, but essentially, I don't think you like payload as much as you think you like payload. Statistically, I don't mean you specifically. I mean you, capital Y, right? Essentially, it wasn't as played as you seem to think it was. That being said, I do think there is a possibility, no time frame and no promises, but a possibility of maybe bringing it back as an LTM or maybe some other way. But it's not, like we have dropped everything to make sure that payload is back at this time.
Okay. Sure, that makes perfect sense. And one thing in my head that I've always thought with games like Paladins, Smite, etc., you always run into an issue of if you have too many game modes, you start splitting the player base too much, and then all game modes itself starts to become lower quality. Is that checks out?
That is absolutely a thing. Like I told you before, that the best way to improve matchmaking is to increase the size of the player base. The fastest way to degrade matchmaking and queue times is to split queues.
Sure.
And so, why don't you split Koth and Onslaught or whatever? Why don't you split? Why don't you just make it another queue? Why don't you just have payload and have an LTM queue and have this, that, or the other queue? It's every time you do that, there's some portion of the player base that's going to be shuffled off into that other queue, which makes it worse, both for that small queue and all the other queues they would have been playing otherwise. Which is not to say that it's not something that we can do. It's just a consideration that we need to have when when there is, why don't you split these queues? Why don't you add another queue? Why don't you do that? That kind of thing.
Awesome. Question. One of my moderators are asking Check. What about clans? The idea of having like guilds and paladins or just like groups.
It's something I suggested like last year, and it's there are a bunch of things that I think would be really cool. Again, it's conceptually very cool.
Yeah.
What would go into making that?
Okay.
But I already think I like that kind of thing.
I play a lot of MMOs and have grown up, so like the community element of a game is always number one in my head.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely number one. An in-game chat system would be huge. Do you elaborate on that, Zarini? Unless you know kind of what that means.
I'm gonna assume like a global chat.
Yeah,
like
some sort. People to talk about during queues.
It's not like, it's a little dangerous.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Right.
Sure.
And I think while it would be cool, I don't necessarily think it's higher on priority than like my personal crusade. I don't know if we're ever gonna do this, but my personal crusade is a learning center, like a codex that includes, if we can manage in-client videos, that includes a codex of all game terms, capital G game terms.
Mm-hmm.
This is what reload speed increase means. This is what cooldown reduction means. Mm-hmm. These are the mechanics in the game. This is the comeback mechanic. This is how HirezNeco works now. Like all that kind of thing. But it's just a matter of, can it be done? Is it worth it being done?
I think a learning center would be amazing. That's one thing I've tried to do that with my YouTube channel. I've released like guide videos, etc. But like it's hard to get that stuff done. It's a lot harder than people think.
Especially in a living game.
Especially what?
Especially in a living game.
Yeah.
Like, okay, here's your Azan guide. First patch of 2022, and then we nerf him. Like, okay, well, can't do that anymore.
Another guy coming out next, or if I made a video about the item store, like let's just say a month ago, they're like, oh, gotta totally rework that video. So that's one thing to remember. Yeah. Ah, God, I love that change. By the way, I can't get enough of that.
I'm so glad that I was worried. Right, yeah. I went to the team. I'm like, hey, I wrote up a whole thing. I said, hey, I really think that we need to take HirezNeco out of the game, which is a little bombastic, a little bit exaggerated because I was not taking it out of the game.
Yeah.
But like, and people were like, okay, but I presented different options. I was like, okay, we could do this, we could do this, we could do this, we could just remove it and not do anything because I wanted to cover all the bases. Mm-hmm. And they were like, yeah, don't do that because you would probably be killed. And I was like, yeah, I know. I just had to put it there just in case. But I've been really happy actually with the overall reception of the change, and even more so, I've been really happy that people seem to understand why I proposed that we make the change.
Absolutely, yeah.
More than just like my favorite and least favorite thing to hear at the same time is who asks for this. Mm-hmm. Because I'm like, you realize if nothing ever changes, then this will not be your favorite game for very long. Yeah. And so, yeah, I mean, who asked for this? Yes, but also we were striving to make, continuing improvements. And I love hearing people get behind, even if they don't necessarily fully agree with it, get behind the idea behind why things are happening.
Important note, chat. This is a personal thing. Nothing with Nico. He can speak on it if he wants. But if you're going to criticize and give feedback, etc., if you're going to criticize things, try to work on coming up with solutions or really explain why you don't like certain things and like really give details why you don't like it. Because if you're giving criticism without giving any sort of solution, it just sometimes falls on deaf ears because sometimes they don't understand why you're criticizing it or sometimes they don't understand why it's even happening in the first place. So when you are criticizing things and giving negative feedback, try to do it in a productive way, give your own solutions or kind of more go in depth why you're criticizing it or you're giving negative feedback. So there's a random side note for me.
To kind of build off of that a little bit, actually, the most valuable feedback you can give me is how you feel about something. Mm-hmm. So, I think this ability is too strong. I use it this way and I feel very strong in that instance. Mm-hmm. Rather than, I think you should reduce its damage by 50. Or whatever. If you give me a specific balance change and say, hey, this is going to fix the game, just do what I'm about to tell you, that is not helpful for me beyond pulling out that you don't like what you're trying to balance. Mm-hmm. It is extremely useful to say, in this instance, I bought this item combo. This ability was really, really, really strong. They stood no chance. And then the design team or the internal team can take a look at that and say, okay, we feel strong in these instances. How can we address that frustration? Rather than, I think you should change, this value by 0.2 and this value by 5%, which is not as useful.
Awesome. Take that feedback, chat. Remember it. Don't forget to tell him how you feel. Tell them how you feel, please.
How does it make you feel?
Tell me how you makes you feel. Sit on my couch. Let's talk about it for a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let me see. I saw one on here. Somebody was talking about, so with the Learning Center idea, what if we just started with reworking the tutorial? Because I've had a bunch of people ask about the tutorial and reworking and just doing a new one. Just a quick new one with the updated game.
I would love to, but you used the word quick.
Yeah.
And it's not going to be a quick new a quick new tutorial. I would love to. I agree. I think the NPE, the new player experience, is something that we can improve on. And so we need to make targeted improvements with the resources we can. And so I agree that I would love to see the tutorial reworked at some point.
Is that, I assume with NPE, like that's discussed internally, like that,
yes.
The idea of a new tutorial has been discussed.
Yep.
Definitely. Okay. Gotcha. Barrick Fat Leon skin, please answer the damn question.
So I don't know about the actual skin, but I use the crappy OB64 sprays for my placeholder art for new champions. Like all their abilities and champion icons are just those sprays. So
okay.
I can't promise Barrick an address, but at least you get that. Let's see. Has the larger than average hitbox been a discussion point between the devs? Yes. And ultimately that's somewhat of a limitation to UE3. We have kind of chunky pill-like hitboxes. There's only so much nuance that you can bring to that, unfortunately.
Does that also translate over to the maps?
Yes, in a way. It is slightly different because character collision is not the same as map collision.
Okay.
But that is very much something that we care about.
Okay.
And actually was like a direct concern when we brainstorm champions for stuff like Tiberius bounce. Can we make it so that his thing is not going to clip off of a small blade of grass that somehow has some kind of collision that's higher than the ground and go every which way? Sure. Or I hear people complain about the Damba gourds and Pyra fire bombs bouncing off some weird angle, which makes sense technically to the game physically, or in the sense of the game physics, but not for player perception, because you don't think that it would have that weird angle. Sure. So that definitely.
Point is a killer when it comes to gourds. The corners of the points, that gourd just, you don't know where it's going to go if it hits the corners. Yeah.
And so, and unfortunately, some of that is limitation of what we can do. But let's see. Engine. What champions do you think need a visual rework? Just visual? Interesting question. I think some of the, I mean, it's kind of a cop-out answer, but some of the older champions, I think we've been really, really killing it with recent champions visually, and that's the one thing I think hi-rez does really well is create visual content, skins, animations, stuff like that, even beyond the rest of the gameplay or whatever kind of thing.
Things just feel good, like throwing in a Zon, especially with the new skin. That new Zon skin, oh my god.
The dragon. Oh.
That is one of the best skins in this game, easily. Especially the animation of throwing the hammer. Oh, it feels so good in the hands. Things feel impactful. I think that's the best way to put it.
That was the goal.
Yeah.
And so and there's so much I would love to talk about in game design in general, but that's a really salient point actually, is the idea of impactfulness, right? If I threw a Zon hammer and it went like blink,
yeah.
Like it just wouldn't work, and I could go so far into that. But let me just say, a core pillar of my design philosophy is the importance of player expectations,
sure.
And how that impacts or informs every decision. Okay. So if I expect something to be chunky and it isn't chunky for some reason, then we have mismanaged player expectation. And if things go along with expectation, then everything's hunky-dory. But as soon as something doesn't feel right, then it sticks out like a sore thumb.
Sure.
Thunder asks, what would your dream champion be? We can end on a fun one.
Sure. Yeah, that's a good question.
What would your dream champion be? So I'll touch on another one of my personal design philosophies is I think there's a lot of value in making sure that champions are accessible by players of all skill levels. And there's so many conversations we could have about game design in general, but accessible by players of all skill levels, but allow for the expression of skill at higher levels. And so Corvus was my first champion I designed, but I tried to do things that would help with that. So stuff like the cooldown reduction when healing a marked target, or the cooldown reduction on your dagger when you don't teleport to it, allows for additional expression of skill, like mark management. You can toss it on somebody and just leave it on that person and just right click to your heart's content, and you still get value out of that, right? But if you want to manage your marks correctly, if you need to focus heal somebody, you mark them and heal them, you get the cooldown reduction and the increased heal, and then you need to split the heal into somebody else, your flank over there, then you heal your main tank again, but in your head you're like, okay, it's going to have a slightly longer cooldown, that kind of thing. So my ideal champion is something that encompasses that, and I like designing supports and damage characters the most. And so I think personally a non-traditional support would be really, really cool. And I don't mean like a true support. I don't think it's viable to have a support that can't support the team with healing of some sort. Like you have, especially in MMOs, you could have a class that's all they do is buff and debuff. They don't
like
actually
a bard, right? They just play tunes. It just increases damage.
Exactly. So I don't think that's necessarily viable in Paladins. But if I could do something like some kind of energy resource that allows for complexity within that skill expression thing as a support, I think that'd be a really fun space to explore.
I think that would be fun. I would absolutely love a non-traditional support. Like, oh man, that sounds so fun. And like, again, last question, but like to touch on what you were saying with champion design, I love the idea of low skill floor, high skill ceiling champions. I think, especially with the 2 support champions, that was done so well with Corvus and Ray. Because Ray is really simple. You just pick her up, her right clicks auto aim. It just bounces. That's all you have to do. But then you have to think about who you want to link, who you want to give the bonus healing to with the link. You have to make sure you're linking the right target for your ultimate. And your ultimate's just point and click. It's a free health button. So it's really easy to get into, but there's these nuances to the champion that really make her what she is, because enveloping herself, like when to envelop yourself, when to envelop the enemies. But yeah, that was just honestly just praise. Like those champions were done really well. And with that design. It didn't
start out. Ray's ultimate was initially a hit scan.
Really?
And it didn't work. Why did I miss that? Kind of thing. But yeah, I mean, I there's so much we can talk about with game design. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah. Awesome. Neco, I absolutely, unbelievably appreciate you for doing this. And I hope we can do more in the future. I would love to do more of this in the future, and I'd love to do this kind of like talking about each patch. I know we were talking about more general questions today, but I'd love to, whenever patch notes come out, etc., we can talk about those and have a conversation.
Yeah, I really appreciate you having me on. Hopefully some of this was either insightful or helpful for you or chat. I love talking to people, so really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Chat, say thank you to Neco for being here, taking his time. He's literally starving right now. Talking to us.
Yeah.
But yeah.
All right, then I will see you next time. Yeah, have a great rest of the stream.
Yep, thank you. I appreciate it.
And good rest of the night. Later,
have a good one. Thanks for being here.
Take care.